The rain didn't just fall. It hammered against the reinforced steel of the Jeep Wrangler like handfuls of gravel thrown by an angry god. Deep in the forgotten arteries of the Blackwood National Forest, the world had reduced itself to the rhythmic, desperate sweep of the windshield wipers and the twin cones of yellow light cutting through the deluge. Elias gripped the leather steering wheel, his knuckles white, finding a perverse comfort in the violent isolation. Inside, the heater hummed a dry, synthetic warmth that smelled of stale coffee and old pine air freshener, a sharp contrast to the freezing, drowning world just inches away behind the glass. He was a master of this terrain, or so he told himself, trusting the machinery to serve as his armor against the encroaching night. He believed in the mechanical locking mechanism that had clicked with a satisfying thud hours ago, sealing him in a bubble of civilization amidst the chaotic ancient timber. But safety is often just a beautifully constructed lie we tell ourselves to keep the panic at bay. As the Jeep lurched over a hidden route and the engine sputtered into an ominous final silence, the sudden absence of vibration amplified the drumming on the roof. It was deafening, consuming everything, a wall of white noise designed to mask the subtle. Yet in that overwhelming cacophony, Elias's survival instinct pricked at the hair on the back of his neck, a primal alarm bell ringing in the void. It wasn't the storm he needed to fear. It was the patch of condensation forming on the inside of the rear window, slowly fogging up the glass in a rhythm that matched a shallow, raspy breath that absolutely did not belong to him. Elias sat frozen. His hands were still clamped to the wheel at the 10 and 2 positions, a useless gesture of control in a vehicle that had just become a 2-ton paperweight. The silence of the engine was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against his eardrums, broken only by the relentless assault of the rain. Tick, tick, tick. The sound of the cooling manifold contracting beneath the hood sounded like snapping bones. He didn't turn around. Not yet. The human mind is a fascinating architect of denial. It will build entire skyscrapers of logic to explain away the impossible. It's just the temperature differential, he reasoned, his internal voice sounding thin and unconvinced. Cold rain outside, hot air inside, physics, just physics. But physics doesn't breathe. He stared into the rearview mirror. It was angled slightly too high, reflecting only the dark, ribbed upholstery of the ceiling and the smear of rain on the back glass. The interior dome light was off. He always drove with it off to save his night vision, so the back seat was a cavern of shadows. A distinct metallic scent began to drift forward, cutting through the aroma of old coffee. It smelled like wet copper, like a handful of pennies left in a damp basement, or blood. Elias reached for the keys dangling from the ignition. His fingers brushed the cold metal, but he hesitated. If he turned the electronics back on, the dashboard would light up. The green glow would illuminate the cabin. It would illuminate them. Don't look. If you don't look, it's not there. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the Douglas firs like a choir of the damned. The Jeep rocked slightly in the mud, a gentle, sickening sway that made his stomach turn. He needed to get out. The winch was on the front bumper. He could hook it to a tree, pull himself out of this ravine. It was a plan. It was action. Action killed fear. He moved his hand to the door handle. The cold plastic felt reassuring. He pulled nothing. He pulled again, harder. The lock pin was down. Of course it was down. He had locked it. He fumbled for the switch on the armrest, pressing the unlock button. Click, clunk. The sound was loud in the small space, but the pin on his door didn't pop up. He tried the mechanical lever again. Jammed. Or held. A drop of sweat rolled down his temple, stinging his eye. He wiped it away, his movements jerky, frantic. He tried the passenger door. Locked. He slammed his shoulder against the driver's side door, panic finally eroding his composure. The steel frame held firm. The Jeep, his fortress, his sanctuary of American engineering, had sealed tight. Then he heard it. It wasn't a roar, it wasn't a scream. It was the sound of fabric shifting, the distinctive synthetic friction of a nylon jacket rubbing against the leather of the back seat. Swish. Elias stopped breathing. The sound came from directly behind his right ear. "The road ends here, Elias," a voice whispered. It was a voice devoid of gender, devoid of warmth. It sounded like dry leaves skittering over pavement. But the terrifying part wasn't the quality of the voice, it was the moisture. He could feel the wet heat of the words hitting the back of his neck. Elias squeezed his eyes shut. "Who are you?" he managed to choke out, his voice cracking into a humiliating squeak. "I have a gun in the glove box." A lie. The glove box contained a tire gauge, a half-eaten granola bar, and a map from 1998. "You don't have a gun," the voice replied, amused. "And you don't have a way out. You drove 3 miles past the last warning sign. You saw the gate was open. You thought it was luck. It wasn't luck. It was an invitation." Elias forced his eyes open. He looked at the windshield. The wipers had stopped mid-wipe, leaving a streak of water that distorted the view of the woods. Through the blur, he saw something standing in front of the Jeep. Illuminated by the dying amber glow of the headlights, a figure stood in the rain. It was wearing a yellow raincoat, hood up, staring blankly at the car. Elias blinked. He looked in the mirror again. The back seat was empty. He whipped his head around, breaking his own rule. The rear bench was vacant. No one. Just the empty leather seats and a duffel bag of clothes. He let out a breath he didn't know he was holding, a laugh bubbling up in his chest, hysterical, jagged. "Jesus," he whispered. "Losing it. I'm losing it." He looked back through the windshield. The figure in the yellow raincoat was gone. Bang! A fist slammed against the driver's side window, right beside his ear. Elias screamed, recoiling into the center console. A face was pressed against the glass, pale, washed out by the rain, eyes wide and devoid of pupils, mouth open in a silent scream. It was a woman. Her hair was plastered to her skull, like wet seaweed. "Bang! Let me in," she mouthed. Or maybe she was screaming it, and the storm was stealing the sound. "He's in there with you, let me in." Elias scrambled for the lock again, his fingers bleeding from how hard he clawed at the plastic. "Get away!" he shouted, though she couldn't hear him. She pointed a shaking finger, not at Elias but past him, into the back seat. Elias froze. The smell of copper returned, stronger this time, overpowering. Slowly, terrifyingly, the condensation on the inside of the windshield began to write. An invisible finger was tracing letters in the fog on the glass, from the inside out. L-O-O-K. Elias didn't want to look, but the rear-view mirror drew his eye like a magnet. The back seat wasn't empty anymore, it was full. Sitting in the middle seat, crowded between the doors, was a man, or what used to be a man. His skin was the color of gray clay. His jaw hung unnaturally low, as if the tendons had been severed, and he was wearing Elias's clothes, the same flannel shirt Elias had on right now. The thing in the back seat raised a hand, mirroring Elias's own trembling posture. It held up a set of keys. Elias's keys. Elias looked down at the ignition. The slot was empty. "I drove us here," the thing in the back whispered, its voice sounding exactly like Elias's own recorded voice on an answering machine. "I drove us here so we could talk." The scream that escaped Elias's throat never left the cabin of the Jeep. It was absorbed by the soundproofing, swallowed by the upholstery, and drowned by the unrelenting rain. 3 weeks later, a logging crew found the Wrangler. It was buried up to its axles in mud miles from the nearest marked road. The battery was dead. The gas tank was full. The doors were unlocked. When the sheriff arrived, they found Elias inside. He was sitting in the back seat, curled into a fetal ball, his eyes wide open, staring at the back of the empty driver's seat. He had died of hypothermia despite the heavy jacket he was wearing. But the detail that kept the sheriff awake for years afterward wasn't the body. It was the inside of the windows. Every inch of the glass from the windshield to the rear hatch was covered in fingerprints. Thousands of them, all on the inside, all pushing outward. And on the dashboard, neatly arranged, were 2 sets of keys, identical. The forest doesn't just take people, my friends. Sometimes it copies them. And sometimes it traps you in the one place you thought you were safe, just to introduce you to the version of yourself that belongs to the dark. Have you ever been driving alone at night and felt the sudden urge to check your back seat? Maybe you should, or maybe it's better not to know. If you survived this story, subscribe to Old World Whispers and tell me in the comments, what is the one place you feel safe that could easily become your tomb? I'll be watching and reading.